Hi. Which computer should I use?
You shouldn't use anyone.
Anyone? Just the clicker?
The clicker, yeah.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for organizing this lovely event, Amit and Shauli and the others behind the scenes, I guess. So today's talk will have two parts. Shai would later tell us about, in some sense, the bad news. So in the coming years, there will be, in some sense, a nightmare when cryptographically relevant quantum computers would, in some sense, pop up. So these could break existing encryption schemes, existing cryptographic schemes, and therefore there will be havoc and very bad news. We'll all have to upgrade our systems. We'll have to deal with breaking of we'll probably hear about attacks, etc., etc. And Shai will tell us all about what we can do about it, etc. Specifically in the context of blockchain, but perhaps even more broadly. And I guess I'm going to tell you about the rainbow, like what's going to happen later. So in the beginning, there will probably be an era where there will be, say, one quantum computer that could break our security. But later, we hope at least, that there will be quantum computers commercially available, just like we have our cell phones, our desktops, etc. So we'll have them available and we could use them. And my focus would be on these good news. I guess in some sense, the bad news is that it's probably going to take a while. Okay, so if the estimates are, it's hard to tell when these things will occur, but probably around 10 years or so till cryptographically relevant quantum computers will appear. Perhaps Shai will get into more of these estimates, etc. And of course, this is all guesswork. We don't really know. And for the stuff that I'm going to talk about, well, that's going to take even way more. Okay, so again, I'm not putting any numbers, but you should take into account that everything that will be discussed here, in some sense, is very long-term solutions. Okay. Okay. Oh, good. So a little bit about me. I'm a computer science professor at Ben-Gurion University. My main research interests are quantum cryptography. And I'm also interested in cryptocurrencies primarily because it's a very nice, in some sense, inspiration, right? I'm thinking about cryptocurrencies as in some sense, a competition to the stuff I'm interested in and trying to see how quantum computers could maybe enhance it or break it, etc. And I guess one of the things that I won't discuss here at all is specifically for proof of work. I have several of those. If you're interested, there was a recent YouTube video in the Bitcoin Embassy. Feel free to have a look. Also in the Presidio Bitcoin conference. Everything is available online. Again, I won't talk about quantum mining and stuff like that today at all. Okay, so as we all know, cryptocurrencies have several drawbacks, right? They have low throughput, high latency, consumes tons of electricity, right? Which is bad for in terms of the carbon impact, etc. And even it has a very non-standard security model, right? We have to assume that the majority of the network is honest, things which are kind of very hard to guarantee, and we might hope for something better. And the main thing that I'll try to convince you today is that we do have a better alternative. It's called one-shot signatures, which I'll present later. And you could use it in various ways. I'll give two concrete examples. And it solves many problems. In particular, you could use it as some sort of a decentralized money and for other purposes as well. So the highlight of the talk would be, in some sense, explaining what one-shot signatures are and how it could be used to kind of solve the problem that you are probably familiar with. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me, and it would be great. Okay. Okay, so the first part of the talk is a simple primitive called public quantum money. And the second part is clonable signatures. And I'll start with an overview. So the way, in some sense, cryptography at large works, and specifically classical cryptography, it uses a notion of classical computational interactability, meaning you start with a problem which is computationally hard and construct a secure protocol out of this hardness assumption, right? We have something that we know we cannot solve efficiently, which sounds like a bad news. This is why it's a lemon. And we create a lemonade from it, meaning a secure protocol that cannot be broken. Why is it so important to have this lemon? Because we need to have an advantage over the adversary, the person who's trying to attack us. So maybe we take two large primes and multiply them. We know the factors, or the adversary, of course, cannot do that. And this is our advantage against the adversary, right? So we use this interactability to get an advantage over the adversaries. And this is something that we've been doing since the 70s successfully. Works really nice. Okay. When we take into account quantum computers, there are several other kind of phenomena that can be added to this mix. Now, I won't give formal, I won't even explain what the quantum model, etc. You'd have to trust me in some sense. Nothing here would be formal or in any level of detail. But still, I'll try to convey some of the main ideas. So one of these main ideas is called no cloning. So if I give you a classical file, can you create another copy of that file? Of course, right? We copy things every day, right? And this is fantastic and makes it easy to, say, transfer things, etc. In the quantum setting, unfortunately, there's something called, well, maybe not unfortunately, it kind of depends on how you look at it, but if I give you a quantum state, you cannot create another copy. This is called the no cloning theorem, right? So for a generic quantum state, even if I hand it to you, there's no way for you to copy it. Now, again, you should remember, whenever for a cryptographer you say, well, you cannot do something, this is great news. Right? Because maybe you will have an edge over your adversary. So this is the first such example. And again, this is purely a quantum phenomenon, right? So we could add it to the mix of the thing that we'll try to do. And the second phenomenon is called no rewinding. So even in the quantum setting, you could measure a state. And when you measure something, you get a classical result back. Say you ask, I don't know, if you have a few qubits, you could measure the qubits and get a classical result about what was the outcome. But this is an irreversible process. You cannot go back. Once you measured, you maybe extracted some insight and maybe you learned something, but you cannot undo the measurement. Okay, so it's in some sense a one-way street, right? You can, once you did a measurement, you cannot go back.
About the no cloning bit, isn't the whole idea of quantum entanglement cloning a quantum state?
No. No.
Okay, then I have a misunderstanding.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with it. So entanglement is a different phenomenon, and of course there is quantum entanglement, but it's not about copying information. In general, you cannot copy quantum information. I'd be happy to explain later, like offline, like there are very simple intuitions for why you cannot do it. But I won't explain in more depth at this point. Okay? Okay. So again, quantum cryptography uses all these, in some sense, no-go results, or these things which are hard to do, right? You cannot clone, you cannot rewind, you cannot solve certain hard problems, and construct secure protocols out of it. This is our lemonade. And there's a field called unclonable cryptography, which consists of quantum money, pseudo-random states, quantum core protection, unclonable signatures, and many others. And again, I'll focus on two concrete examples, quantum money and unclonable signatures, in this talk. But again, it's kind of a broader field. Okay. So what is public quantum money? So in public quantum money, we have several algorithms. In the first algorithm, the bank generates a pair of keys, a secret key and a public key. Of course, the bank keeps the secret key to itself and, tells the entire world about the public key, as usual with public keys. Good. There's a minting algorithm. The minting algorithm takes the secret key and creates a quantum state. The mint or the bank can send this quantum state to some user. And suppose the user now wants to use the money, right? So the user could send the money to some other person. But now, of course, there is a challenge. How could the other person know that this quantum money state is indeed a valid one rather than a fake? So there's another algorithm called verify, which takes the public key, the quantum state, which should be, or we hope to be, the money, and tells us whether it's a valid quantum money state or not. Okay? And that's pretty much it in terms of the functionality. Right? Hopefully this makes sense. Yeah.
The entire idea of cryptocurrency on the surface was not to have a bank.
Good. So to begin with, this is in some sense the first attempt. This is just like centralized form of money. You're absolutely right. We'll talk about in 15 minutes or so, we'll talk about how to make that, like, in some sense, decentralized, if you wish. Right, so here we're talking about a centralized system. Good. Now, what do we want from money system? So the main thing that we want is unforgeability. What does it mean? It means that if the adversary received n quantum money states from the bank, he shouldn't be able to produce n+1 states which pass verification, right? Or more. So we want to show that for no matter what the adversary does, and of course we kind of assume that it needs to be efficient, right? It needs to run in polynomial time. But other than that, it shouldn't succeed with that. Okay, so except with negligible probabilities, something which are tiny and we can ignore, the adversary won't be able to produce. And so say if he received $100, he shouldn't be able to produce 101 or more valid dollars. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, this is very similar to cash, right? Just like, what's your name? Aviv was saying, right? It's very similar to the system that we use today, but it has quite a few, so two main advantages over cash. Still decentralized, but it has advantages. So what are these advantages? So first of all, what stops you from forging the $100 shekel bill that you have in your pocket? Sorry? The police. It's a social contract, right? We enforce it, and that's pretty much the right answer. There's no, and moreover, there are no guarantees about how hard it's gonna be to forge. And here, assuming some hardness assumptions, say this is provably secure. Okay, good. Now, another disadvantage of cash that's became prominent in the recent years, that it's not the case that we can always use cash. Right? We can't use it for online payments, primarily because it's not digital. Right? Why? Maybe another question. Why isn't cash digital? Why can't it be made digital? Because, well, digital things can be copied, right? And therefore, it's not a really nice medium for that. So you need to construct more complicated mechanisms, such as Visa, etc. And unlike cash, which is peer-to-peer. Right? So another advantage of public quantum money is that it can be transmitted via a quantum channel. Right? right? So if we have a quantum internet, you could send and pay with your public quantum money in the quantum internet. Yeah.
How it's addressed fungibility, because if you make reference to the cat, each coin that says fungible,
Yeah.
and here you say that it's each quantum is a quantum group is unique. So
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. Yeah. So there's actually a lot of interest. Sure, so I'll repeat the question. So the question that I think both about fungibility and maybe privacy was the motivation more of, right? So you're absolutely right that there could be more like requirements for public quantum money. I'll talk about one of that these kind of additional properties later. Look for quantum coins. And you were actually saying that, right? You're saying coins are indistinguishable from each other. So there are constructions for privacy-oriented quantum money, but this is fairly more, slightly more complicated, slightly more advanced. I'd be happy to give reference later if you're interested. And actually, there was a really nice work last year that I think kind of nailed it and gave a really interesting example. You know, since you asked, I want to even mention this. So they showed something which is kind of remarkable. So they showed, this is Chakan, Goyal, and I forgot the last author. But they showed that you could achieve, in some sense, privacy and not privacy in some sense. So there's only one party which could break security. Okay, so like, so imagine that you want to say, you want to have something which is in some sense trackable, but only to a single person, and that this tracking facility cannot be removed. So imagine if you're interested in tax evasion and you want to avoid that, so for all people it's going to work nicely, and others, let's put it this way. So first of all, if you use cash today, right, it has a serial number. It is traceable. So in some sense, everybody could trace the notes, right? So here, only a central entity, which by the way is not necessarily the same entity as the bank, could trace people. So for example, you could say, okay, only the tax authority in the country could figure out what's going on here.
Yeah, but you say that in digital, you understand that in digital world versus banknotes or coins, it's very easy to trace NFT, quantum NFTs that is like quantum money.
Okay, let's do it offline. Yeah, it's kind of, yeah. For some reason, it's not working, Amit. Oh, okay, no. Okay. So the next part is going to be about describing what one-shot signatures are. So they are the quantum child in some sense with two classical parents. One parent is digital signatures, the other is hash functions. Okay? So first thing, I'll try to remind you what digital signatures are. Hopefully you have some understanding of what it is. And the same thing for hash function. And then we'll do something which is kind of weird and combine them to get one-shot signatures. Okay. So what is a digital signature? So suppose someone generates a public key. Okay. The adversary sees that public key and should be able to, or he wants to forge it, meaning the adversary wants to produce a message and a signature which passes the verification, right? So you get to see the public key, and now your goal is to produce forge, meaning you don't have the secret key, and you still want to produce a signature for some document. If you manage to do it, we say that you managed to successfully forge the system. And of course, this is what shouldn't be possible, right? In a good signature scheme, an adversary shouldn't be able to pass this security game. Good. what is a collision-resistant hash function? So this is something like SHA-256, RipMed. I'm sure you've heard of many others, or may have heard of other collision-resistant hash functions. So here, the adversary doesn't receive anything, right? The only goal of the adversary is to produce x1 and x2 such that the hash of x1 is equal to the hash of x2, right? So producing two different inputs with the same hash. Right? This is called the collision because the hash to the same thing, right? Clearly, it's some sort of a collision, right? Two things map to the same thing. So this is cool. And of course, again, in a good hash function, this should never happen, right? It's secure if this property holds, that it's hard to find a collision. So now we're going to do something weird and combine them. Okay? So what are one-shot signatures? So in a one-shot signature, it's very similar to a digital signature scheme. We still have a signing algorithm, a key generation algorithm, and a verification algorithm. The main difference is that the signing key is a quantum state. Okay? Now, classically, if I'm asking you, give me a public key, you choose it, and two signatures that would pass verification with respect to that public key. Can you do it? Right, of course, clearly you can. How would you do it? Well, you create a secret key and a signing key, and use the signing key to sign two messages, right? With a digital signature scheme, you could sign any number of messages, right? For one-shot signatures, you shouldn't be able to do it. So what does it mean? The adversary cannot produce PK and two distinct messages and signatures, M1, M2, SIG1, and SIG2, such that both pass verification. Kind of weird. So again, this has the flavor of the collision resistant because we want to find two things that pass verification or that has some property, right? So this is somewhat like a collision-resistant hash function, and it's like a digital signature in terms of the syntax, right? It has a key generation algorithm, it has a signing algorithm and a verification algorithm. And the main idea is, maybe another thing to mention, can an adversary sign a single message? Yeah, it could generate, again, follow the procedures to generate a public key and a quantum signing key and sign a single message. But the main point is that the signing algorithm consumes or measures the signing algorithm would measure the state and consume it. And since it's irreversible, you cannot go back and sign a different message. Okay, so so this is kind of the main idea. Hopefully, I'm repeating it again, that it would be crystal clear. So again, one-shot signatures were introduced by Amos et al. There's another recent paper by Omri Shmueli and Mark Zandri from last year, where there are three algorithms: gen, right, which generates a public key and a quantum signing key; sign, which takes the quantum signing key and a message and produce a signature, classical signature, and a verification algorithm, right, which takes a public key, a message, and a signature, and outputs valid or invalid. Okay. So again, the generation takes creates a public key and a quantum signing key. Sign produces a classical signature. And again, I want to emphasize, the signing algorithm would measure the quantum signing key. So it would be destroyed. That's the intuition. So you could produce a signature, but that's it. You're done. You cannot create yet another signature. Very unlike classical digital signatures, right? Where you can sign many messages. And verification algorithm, which takes the message and the public key and the signature and output true or false, and output either accept or reject, right? Whether it's a valid or invalid signature. what does correctness mean? So if you follow the standard pipeline, it would work correctly. So hopefully you could see. So if we generate a public key and a quantum signing key and sign an arbitrary message and get sigma and check whether it's valid, can you see the kind of, right? And then you check whether verification accepts, it's going to accept with probability 1. Okay? So if you do whatever you're used to from a digital signature scheme, where you generate a public key and secret key, sign and verify, it should pass. But notice that this holds once. You cannot repeat it. What exactly does it mean? Oops. So the adversary now should output 2 pairs, M1 sigma 1, M2 sigma 2, and a public key. And it shouldn't be the case that these are distinct messages. This is the first requirement. And it's both message pass verification. So 2 valid signatures associated with the same public key, which again should mimic the properties of a collision-resistant object, right? Okay. And of course, we say that the one-shot signature scheme is secure if every polynomial time adversary shouldn't be able to do that, right? Shouldn't be able to create this collision. Good. Again, it's not. Oh, good. Thanks. Okay. So, first application of this one-shot signature primitive. So, one of the challenges in Ethereum and many other cryptocurrencies, is called long-range attacks. What does it mean? So in Ethereum, we have these validators, right? And suppose a validator, right, at some point, a validator could leave the system, right, get his staking back, and say even sell his Ethereum, right? But he still has his validator's signing key. And such a validator could maybe sell that signing key. And this could be used for many attacks, right? Because suppose even the majority of the stakers would do it, this would be impossible to recover from, because new nodes in the network would see a completely different story, right? In the original story, everything went, in some sense, this way, and now the old stakers use their stake to create a completely different line of history. And this is called the long-range attacks. Yep.
I have a question. Can you take the one-time signatures and extend them to be like multiple-time signatures? Because like in what you're proposing, there's still like the issue of distributing the new public keys because the validators like at the first time.
Yeah. So the idea would be, so certainly the answer is yes in some sense. And imagine that whenever you sign so you use your quantum signing key to kind of introduce a new public key. So before you sign, so not only you sign a message saying, hi, good morning, you say, hi, good morning, the next public key is this new public key. And then you'd be able to use that.
But you can include anything like each signature the next public key?
Yes.
Okay.
You could do it. So this is one way to achieve what you're saying. And indeed, this is kind of the approach how you could do something like a validator who needs to sign many messages. At every point in time, he would have only one such key, but you'd have the entire history of all the messages that he signed. And therefore, there's no way to do this long-range attacks. because it stops this issue. Okay. Give me a second. Hopefully, it would be clear. So again, if you use one-shot signatures, and you already signed the message, you cannot sign a different conflicting message with it.
So the question is, if the validating data would require me to have a linear size of public keys to validate.
Excellent questions. I don't want to get into this business, but yeah, these are excellent questions, and there are many ways to tackle it, including snarks, etc. And there are many natural questions that indeed arise, and I won't get into that business, unfortunately. And I'll be a bit even more honest, there's very little discussion about these questions. So, yeah, okay. So Justin Drake from the Ethereum Foundation, who's one of the very few people I'm aware of that's very much interested in these approaches, said the following: if we can, sorry? Justin Drake said, if we can get them to be to a practical stage, they will completely change the endgame of blockchains. So hopefully some of you know him and trust his judgment, and I think it's a big deal. But again, this won't be the subject of my talk. This is mainly a motivation and kind of to shed, I think it shows that, yeah, there are many useful applications of this primitive. You know what, maybe I'll also mention that this Shmuel Zandri paper received the best crypto paper last year. Crypto is by far like the most important conference in cryptography. And this is a quantum paper, which is highly unusual for a quantum paper to get the best paper in crypto. So the community kind of appreciates the development in that line of research. Okay. So the next part is how to use one-shot signatures to construct these centralized payment schemes, which are slightly more advanced than the public one-to-money scheme that we mentioned before. But again, this is still centralized. Later, in the next part, in part 3, we'll talk about decentralized constructions. Okay. So one-shot signatures can be used to construct something which is called semi-quantum public quantum money. Okay. So what does it mean, semi-quantum? It means that some parts of the protocol are completely classical. So what exactly do I mean? Here, the bank is completely classical. The way it creates the quantum money is a bit weird. It's an interaction between the user and the bank, so that in some sense, the user prints its own money. The minting is done by interacting, but the user is the one who's minting the money. Kind of weird. Okay. The way that this is done is by the following idea. So again, the user creates a one-shot signature key pair, right? He creates a public key and a quantum signing key and asks the bank to sign his public key, right? The bank signs the public key using a digital signature scheme. Classical digital signature scheme, therefore, the bank does not need a quantum computer whatsoever, and sends the signature to the user. Notice that at this point, the user has the quantum signing key, the public key, and a signature. Good. Now, Alice wants to send the money to Bob. What will she do? We'll repeat this process. Bob will generate a public key and a quantum signing key of his own, and send the public key to Alice. Alice will sign Bob's quantum signing key, Bob's public key, using her quantum signing key, and send all that information to Bob. if it looks like a chain, you're absolutely right. What we're seeing here is a chain of public keys and signatures, and public keys and signatures, etc., etc. And it gets as what's your name again? No, the one at the back. Yeah, what's your name again? Ram. So you were kind of saying, look, it grows linearly with the number of, absolutely. Okay, so here is one such example where every time we move the money, it adds more and more length to the money state in some sense. So it grows linearly. I don't know if it's bad, not like, is it too bad? I don't know. Are there better ways? These are kind of complicated questions, but still it works. And again, how would Bob verify the money? So the first check, so again, you should think about it as a chain of public keys and signatures, public keys and signatures. So the first thing that that Bob should check is that indeed the bank signed the public key, the original public key, Alice's public key. This means the bank kind of crowned or already guaranteed, yeah, the original public key was indeed a good money state. And then the second part says, well, not only the original money was valid, the user used his quantum signing key to sign the new, or Bob's public key. So now you should think about it as moving the value to the new public key, to Bob's public key. So every time this signature is done, it kind of moves the money to a new place. Okay? And if everything works, Bob's says, yay, I received the money, and he's happy. So again, in general, there could be more of those, and there should be also already a chain of public keys and signatures going from the bank to the current user. And that's how we construct public quantum money from one-shot signatures. And again, there are two main advantages here. One is kind of weak, maybe, but the bank doesn't need a quantum computer, right? He only needs a digital signature scheme, so he can use a digital signature, like a classical computer. And the second one is way more important. Notice that in order to transfer the money, there's no need for a quantum internet, right? There's only classical messages going around. So you don't need quantum communication, which could be complicated. So great. So one-shot signatures give us a more advanced form of public quantum money. Good. Okay. So the next question is related to smart contracts. Indeed, I don't have a very nice definition for it. This is how Vitalik Buterin described it. Again, he didn't really define it because I still don't know of a good definition. And he said the following: smart contracts are systems which automatically move digital assets according to arbitrary pre-specified rules. For example, one might have a treasury contract of the form A can withdraw up to X currency units per day, B can withdraw up to Y per day, A and B together can withdraw anything, and A can shut off B's ability to withdraw. Right? So some form of a programmable money. Right? I'm sure you've all heard of this notion, and yep.
I think Zabo has a great paper from '95 on smart contracts. Definition of smart contracts is a point. It's like, I think what smart contracts paper itself in Zabo.
Sure. So yeah. So but again, I'm not sure if there's a definition there. Like, isn't he also giving it by examples?
He gives an example. There's like Pivity. There's like 3 or 4 examples that he puts in there as like the functions of a smart contract, and then I think the paper is called economies or something? I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I know that paper, but again, I didn't find a definition of what it is, other than examples.
There's definition.
There are definitions. Okay,
There's actually a
I'll have a look.
Question is if what you call a definition is the same as what you call a definition, right? Yeah.
it's not paper.
So you're saying it's not really a definition. So won't call it a definition.
The paper,
Okay,
but
never mind.
You could be.
Disagreeing about the notion of what the definition is. Okay, I see.
Does it define what a definition?
Okay,
Sorry, I had a second question.
sure.
That was the point I wanted to bring up. The question I had is just quickly on like the core examples that you can point to of an early implementation, something in the financial market, any kind of examples of experimentation of it actually moving money or anything that is like a tangible thing where someone's like, hey, great, it's in action.
So the quantum computers we have today can kind of maintain their state, most of them, roughly for a millisecond.
So one shot's for a millisecond, and that's
And especially when we talk about money, you want this thing to function for, say, 10 years to the very least. So there are tons of orders of magnitude that we need to kind of advance the technologies so for this to function. There are very early examples of very primitive forms of quantum money, say what's called private quantum money. There are some kind of very early demonstrations of it. Again, it's going to take decades. Yeah. Okay. So using this notion of one-shot signatures, we can construct, again, a centralized form of what I called prudent contracts. These aren't as smart as smart contracts, and I definitely cannot have these limitations, right? It's not as smart, but I would argue that it is sufficient to implement pretty much all the important examples which are actually used in Bitcoin, but not Ethereum, say, right? And Ethereum, of course, uses smart contracts much more heavily and design really nice and interesting kind of ideas. I won't be able to do that. But for some things like multisig and permanent accounts, which I'll explain, etc. So several neat examples which you can actually do using this idea of one-shot signatures. So the first thing that we could say is, well, before we talked only about chains, you should think about that if we think about chains, every quantum money state has a value, say $1. Now, we don't really have to be limited to that, right? So imagine that Charlie could tell Alice and Bob to pay him to his public key, to PKC, right? PK of Charlie. And they will do that. And now he has two proofs. Maybe each such proof is for $1, but now he has a proof that his public key was charged with $2, right? And now he could spend it and say, maybe send David $1 and Aaron $1, or maybe half and 1.5 to, it doesn't even need to be equal, right? So you could already see that it's, slightly more advanced, where you could kind of, unlike cash, where you cannot, if I give you, like, suppose you have 2 bills of 50 shekels in your wallet. Can you combine them to a single bill worth of 100? You cannot do that, right? So this is something called mergeability. I could take 2 bills and merge them, right? I can also do that. I could also divide it, right? Take my $10 and divide it to 10 $1 bills if I want, by simply creating 10 states and signing a message saying the first public key gets $1, the second public key gets $1, etc. You could do it in arbitrary ways. Every state has its own value, like every public key would have some money charged to it. And when you spend from it, you kind of like, you could spend whatever you had charged to that. So essentially you could think of the thing that should be checked is if Charlie spent $2, then somehow he'd have to provide the proof that this quantum money had $2 charged. If it was 10, it needs to provide 10 such proofs, etc., etc. And you could combine it. You could divide, merge, etc., as many times as you wish. Okay? Okay. Another neat example is something called a saving account. So imagine that you have like, you want to send money to your, or to kind of have a saving account for your kids. Okay? So you could open, in some sense, 2 different accounts. But here, and say, send money to that. But here you could do something even more complicated or more kind of automatic, where you say, well, when you open the account, you say, even dollars go to Alice and odd dollars go to Bob. Right? And then if later you will charge the parent's account with money, the odd ones would go to, the even one would go to Alice, and the odd ones would go to Bob. Okay. Then next example is kind of neat. Ken?
I have a question about the previous slide.
Yep.
I hope it's not, but if, say, after 5 years they have a third child, do they need to restart the thing or can they update it?
I don't know. Yeah, I'll have to think about it. Okay. I'm not sure how it could be done. Okay. Another example is multisig account. Here, Alice would create PK1, PK2, PK3. And in order to spend the money, we would kind of agree that you need 2 out of 3 signatures. Notice that if we require 2 out of 3, it would work. If we require 1 out of 3, it wouldn't work. Okay, because if we have 1 out of 3, it could just use the first key to send money to one thing, the second key to another. This way, it cannot be done. So if it's more than the majority, it would be secure. So again, this kind of shows that not everything is possible, but rather there are examples which are possible. Yep.
You have like a Bitcoin where you have one transaction and part of the transaction is going paid to the party, and the other part of the transaction is changed.
Sure. Sure. So here you should think of Erin could be Charlie actually. It doesn't need to be really a different party. So yeah, you could definitely do that if you want to. Yeah, actually, and you do want to do that actually. It's a good point that it's actually necessary in some sense. Otherwise, you kind of what happens to the rest of the money? It kind of goes away. So you probably want to do that. Okay. And since I think I'm running out of time, I think I'll skip the security tokens, but probably you know that you could use Bitcoin for issuing securities, say stocks. So again, for these kind of thing, you want several properties. You want it to be tradable, just like NFTs. You want it to have to provide voting rights and dividends for shareholders. All of this could be achieved using one-shot signatures. But unfortunately, I'll skip how it's done. I think this is the most advanced example. Yeah. So by kind of extending these techniques, we can construct permanent accounts. You probably know this idea that you could kind of use QR codes, etc., for Bitcoin. There is a challenge here because once you spend it, there's only one shot of spending the quantum money. So, right, you use it as a signature. So this is not entirely trivial, but actually the idea that you mentioned about having so you could use it. So every time you spend it, you kind of say, okay, the change would go this way. And then you could kind of publish your quantum money QR code and achieve a similar thing, atomic swap, proof of reserves, and many other or several other examples. But again, it's not as rich as Ethereum, and there are concrete examples such as ENS, like an Ethereum name service. I definitely don't think that's possible to do with something like one-shot signatures. Okay. And the idea is, notice that we don't solve the consensus problem. We're solving an easier problem in some sense. And this is very nice, right? The fact that you don't need to solve consensus means, well, there are many shortcuts that you could take. So we're not solving the consensus problem. It means that some things like ENS, which require consensus, wouldn't be possible. But still, we get to do it without using any form of a blockchain. It's truly peer-to-peer, etc. Okay. The last part of this talk is about how to kind of upgrade a system such as Bitcoin to use this public quantum money using one-shot signatures. So again, Bitcoin has many upsides and downsides. Bitcoin has censorship resistance and no trusted third party. It's digital, some smart contract capabilities, and it requires mining. It has no non-standard security model, and it has no low throughput and high latency. Quantum prudent contracts have all these advantages, but one disadvantage, right? It requires a trusted third party. And the idea is, well, using one-shot signatures, actually, we could remove the first problem. And the idea is pretty simple. Oops. Okay. So our solution is to use this idea of prudent contracts to get the best of both worlds. No trusted third party. Payments are completely peer-to-peer. Infinite throughput, very, very fast. And the mining could be terminated. You don't need a blockchain anymore. So that's very nice. And how could it be done? So the way it would work is that essentially when we'll have one-shot signatures available, Alice would essentially create a one-shot signature key pair, meaning a public key and a quantum signing key, and would use her Bitcoin digital signature key to say, well, I'm moving all the Bitcoin that I have to this new one-shot signature public key, right? So she's essentially saying, or the user is saying, well, I want to upgrade my Bitcoin to have a quantum form. Okay, and of course, at this point, you should think about it as saying, my Bitcoin cannot be used anymore. I kind of upgraded it to quantum form. So it was, yeah, that's it. You won't see any of that Bitcoin used anymore. So Alice would say, I, Alice, hereby upgrade my K Bitcoins to the quantum account with public key PKA. And from this point onward, she would use it just like any other prudent contract we've seen before, right? When she wants to send it to Bob, she would say, well, Bob, send me your public key, right? Bob would generate, of course, his own one-shot signature public key and quantum signing key and send the public key to Alice. Alice will sign her the message saying, well, I'm transferring my money or my Bitcoin to the public key of Bob. And she'll provide a pointer to the blockchain where she already kind of proves that she upgraded her Bitcoin to quantum money, right? And all of this information together will be passed to Bob. So again, the idea is that we use it very, very similar to the previous scheme, except we use the blockchain as the source of truth, right? So before we said, well, the bank signed something. Now it's whatever written on the blockchain, which represents the ground truth for the beginning, right? Good. Sure.
Does Alice, the Bitcoin account, she transfers all her like UTXO shares, does it have to be like the real account, which is like generates with the private key, or can it be just like an outlet in the public key that no private key?
No, she needs to sign a message saying that. Of course, it needs to be a.
But the signing, is it like the one short signature signing?
No. It's like using her like she has a Bitcoin wallet. The first thing she does is say using my classical signing key. Yes. It's just I'm upgrading. I'm moving my money to my new public key. Okay. Yeah.
You're ignoring the whole economy of Bitcoin.
In what sense?
Mining and the transactions and everything. That it's an economy. It's a closed economy that is.
It's a horrible economy in some sense. Look, you do need that.
Maybe
it's
working.
No, I would say, look, it's a really bad solution, right? If we can get around it and have a better solution, it's really nice. Look, you're saying we're spending tons of money. There's a market for it, etc., for securing the network. But now there's a better solution. And I would argue that if there's a better solution that doesn't require this entire infrastructure and is way more secure and wouldn't require mining, and that's my last point, that you could stop mining, this is fantastic. You're switching to a vanilla standard security model.
You think the truth, you need the mining.
So, and you need the truth to the upgrade, and then at some point you could stop mining. Once everybody switches, if you wish, you could really stop mining because it's not needed anymore. It would be like, I know, just like we kind of got rid of pay to key script, which was the old way of spending Bitcoins. This is not used anymore. Then the standard Bitcoin wouldn't be used anymore because it's way less efficient. It's heavy. You're just limited by it. So here you're unlimited. You have infinite throughput. You could do many more things. So I would argue this is simply better. I wouldn't even say that there are trade-offs here. Yeah?
Yeah, there's something that's bothering me here. On one hand, you say that the blockchain archive will remain the source of truth.
Indeed.
But on the other hand, you say that we don't need to mine it anymore.
So imagine that we'll say something like the following. In 20 years, we'll stop mining. Upgrade your Bitcoin to quantum money by year 2050.
Okay.
And at this point, you will stop mining.
In 2050,
Yeah.
I need to go all the way to the original blockchain.
Indeed.
So what prevents someone from building a heavier blockchain and take all the time that he needs because miners don't add weight to the original blockchain?
True. So you should think of it as at year 2050, we'll create the hash of the kind of the last tip of the chain, and that would be the ground, represent the ground truth. And we'll all agree. This is like just like the pub. Okay, so we'll use it just like today we have a public, like the Genesis block, which is the ground truth. You have some fixed something. So here it would be.
The Genesis block is the ground truth. I think of the tip as the ground truth, and I do it because there is the most weight below it compared to any other tip I know. I'm always taking the heaviest chain.
Even if if it does not start with the Genesis block? No.
Okay, no. But if I want to do a mining attack, I always mine my own chain over the same Genesis.
So this will replace your Genesis. There is a notion of ground truth. I agree with you. There is something that you need to trust, but it's not very different than what's going on with Bitcoin. There is the Genesis block.
It's only 32 bits.
Yes.
Right? So I can make sure
this is the public key.
people has a copy.
Yes, and it's just like the public key of whatever system that you want to use.
Okay.
Yep.
Genesis block has like a special property of it being with no initial UTXO, like no initial money. Versus here, you are trusting something this is all the money distribution.
Sure.
So it's like in
Indeed, I agree that it's not exactly the same. I think it's the advantages are simply too big to ignore. Yeah, so this is a trade-off, I would agree. Okay, you could stop mining. Very nice. Yeah. I think we're done. Thank you.